Hi everyone, I'm excited that you're able to join me today for Simon Says Stamp's newest release, Hello Gorgeous. So, hello gorgeous. This set of card features Tattered Leaves, an absolutely beautiful die, all on a dusky ink blended background. All of the embossed detailing really make this a special die. These cards are easy to make, so let's get started. These ink blended backgrounds are being done on Bristol Smooth cardstock with Distress Oxide inks. The panels right now are 4 1/4 inches by 5 1/2 inches, but they will be trimmed down later. The dusky quality for all 3 panels has been created with black soot. For the panel that I'm working on now, I'm also using mowed lawn and antique linen. When creating an ink blended background, I start by just laying the colors out on the panel. Even on Bristol Smooth cardstock, there's a big difference from when the ink is first applied to subsequent applications. The ink goes on very smoothly when it's applied to that base coat. It's at this point that I start extending one color into the next color. Where there is overlapping of the 2 colors, I do lighten my pressure slightly, and that creates a nice smooth blend. But of course, it does take a few applications to achieve that. Depending on the color combination, I will apply at least 3 coatings, sometimes more. This was one of the more panels. And this panel, with its combination of sponge sugar, villainous potion, and black soot, was one of the 3 applications of ink ones. So really, it just depends on how those colors are blending together. When choosing colors for a blend, I like to go with one that is very light, a mid-tone, and a dark tone. And it doesn't have to be within the same color family, as long as the 2 colors that are being blended result in something pleasing. Both the Distress inks and the Distress Oxide inks blend beautifully, and I like to experiment with different combinations. This combination is a more obvious choice, with the black soot being blended out with fossilized amber and then scattered straw. But depending on that final look that you're going for, you can have a lot of fun playing with color. All 3 panels were set aside to dry completely, and then they were trimmed down to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. This panel is going to be die cut with one of the dies from the Thin Circle Frames die set. A piece of black foam was placed underneath the panel, and it was die cut at the same time. The foam was not die cut all the way through, but there was a good impression, and I just had to run my scissors along the edge to release it. The ink blended panel was adhered to the foam die cut, making sure that those circle edges were lining up. When adhering anything to foam, it can take a little bit longer to dry than paper to paper. I don't want anything to slip out of position, so before I start trimming off the excess foam, I let it dry under some weight so that there's good contact between the foam and the cardstock. The Thin Circle frame produces 2 die cuts, the circle and a very fine frame. I want a black frame, and because I'm mounting my panel on black cardstock, I don't have to worry about that second die cut. I make sure that the circle is oriented correctly so that the blending matches, and then it is centered and recessed into the foam-backed panel. Simon Says Stamp's Miss You will be the main sentiment for this card. It is die cut from both black cardstock and black foam. When die cutting a sentiment out of foam, I don't remove the backing. I leave it in place, only removing the center of the letters. The foam sentiment will have an impression that makes it very easy to align the black cardstock one to it. To keep the stacked sentiment aligned, the excess foam is not removed until it is dry, about 10 minutes. So in the meantime, I can continue working on my card front and attach the panel to an A2 size card base. Not that it took me 10 minutes to do that, but oh my goodness, the power of editing. Fast forward, I can remove my sentiment from the foam and position it so I know where the Tattered Leaves die cut is going to go. The foam back sentiments are adhered to the panel. And with the help of a jewel picker, I get the foam back dot over the eye. Tattered Leaves has been die cut from black cardstock for all 3 cards. For the leaves that are closest to the raised portion of the panel, I'm kind of going back and forth trying to figure out which leaves need a little bit of foam. I am using the small foam squares, but the leaves are narrow, so I cut them in half. Sometimes when you cut them, they can stick to your scissors. I leave the foam back squares on the backing and cut them in half while they are in place, and then there's no sticking at all. I'm just going to snip off that one leaf that is overlapping the sentiment. All of the leaves that are overhanging the recessed circle do have a little bit of foam on the back to keep them stable. The leaves in the stem that are flush with the panel have been adhered with liquid adhesive. Then in it goes to the stamping platform so that I can stamp the secondary sentiment from Simon Says Stamps inside friendship messages. And I like to hold my MISTI up so that I can see that the sentiment is lined up with the grid. And when I'm satisfied that it's straight, I stamp it with black VersaFine ink. The second panel has also been trimmed down to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches, and it is going to be die cut with one of the dies from Simon Says Stamps stitched rectangles. I also die cut black sheet foam. What I love about this die set is it produces a double stitch detailing if you retain both the inner and outer portion of the panel, which is exactly what I'm doing, and the inner panel has been mounted on black foam. The outer portion of the panel is going to be mounted on black cardstock that measures 4 1/8 inches by 5 3/8 inches. I first adhere the black cardstock to the card base that is A2 sized. The frame is adhered, centering it on the black mat. The foam back panel is lined up and mounted to the interior opening of the frame. Simon Says Stamps Take Care will be the primary sentiment for this card. To help the sentiment stand out just a little bit more, it is going to be foam backed like the other one. I follow the very same process that I do for all of my foam back sentiments. This particular sentiment is quite fine, so I have a little bit too much glue, so I just use some paper towel to dab it up. The Tattered Leaves die cut is going to sit on top of that raised panel. I am just applying glue along the stems. The leaves are going to have a little bit of dimension, so I go back to my little foam squares and cut them in half. Will be the right size to pop on the back of all of those leaves. By the time the leaves are done, I'm ready to remove the excess foam from the sentiment. The words are adhered to the card in a staggered fashion. The secondary sentiment, again from Inside Friendship Messages, is stamped with black VersaFine ink. Card 3, and this 4-inch by 5 1/4 inch panel and black sheet foam were die cut at the same time with one of the dies from Simon Says Stamps A2 thin frames. This card, the frame will have dimensions, so it is adhered to the foam die cut. I don't want anything to slip out of alignment, so I'm going to set it aside and let it dry for about 10 minutes before I trim off the excess. So while I'm waiting, I go ahead and mat my card base with black cardstock that measures 4 1/8 by 5 3/8 inches. I also go ahead and do the foam backing for my sentiment, which is Simon Says Stamps Big Hugs. Again, this sentiment is quite fine and it's difficult not to get too much glue, so I use a paper towel just to dab some of it up. I'm going to use my Tim Holtz guillotine trimmer to cut off the excess foam from the frame. To ensure that the blade is lined up with the cardstock frame, I just drop it a bit to make sure that everything is aligned. By looking at that inside edge, you can see if the blade is going to be lined up along the cardstock. This will ensure that the side of the foam is cut cleanly. The frame is then centered on the black matting. Like the die used in the first card, the A2 thin frames produces a thin frame. I'm just going to center that interior panel right within the opening, and then I won't have to worry about that die cut. But I will still have achieved that thin frame look. The half foam back squares are going to be adhered to all of the leaves that will be overhanging the recessed area, which is most of them. When all the backing is removed, it is positioned on the panel. I use just a little bit of liquid adhesive on the leaves and the little section of stem that is flush with the frame. After the foam back sentiment is adhered, the secondary sentiment from Inside Friendship Messages is stamped with black VersaFine ink. I wanted to coordinate the confetti with the colors of the cards. I was able to get everything that I needed out of one mix called Rainbow Confetti by Studio Kasha. They were finished off with Nouveau Crystal Drops Morning Dew, giving them a beautiful jewel-like appearance. And that wraps up this trio of cards featuring Simon Says Stamps Tattered Leaves. I love the beautiful embossed details of this die. And as you can imagine, this is just one of many new amazing products in the newest release by Simon Says Stamp, Hello Gorgeous. Be sure to check it out. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I appreciate your visit.